The global world order is a criminal enterprise. Hudson Bay, Nokia, Unilever. What do these three companies have in common? It is that they are each, either directly or indirectly, connected historically to the colonization of land, the theft of resources, and the destruction of various indigenous people on the planet. And it is this connection that has allowed them to accumulate the enormous wealth, which has allowed them to become billion-dollar corporations and household names in the 20th and 21st century. And because time is eternal and human lifespans are short, we carry on with them in a collective insomnia, continue to give financial reward to the very same entities who were responsible in part, or at least profited, from the destruction of our people. I made a video recently where I stated that when you understand the violence and insidiousness of capitalism, imperialism, and neocolonialism, that actively fighting against it is our only moral stance. Because no matter how hegemonic these systems become, our unrestrained participation in them is complicity in our own exploitation. And so I wanted to take time to explain in detail why you should be doing all you can to not just refrain as much as possible from participating in these systems, but also why you should be doing everything in your power as you go about your daily activities to actively undermine these systems. Because the global world order is a criminal enterprise that neither deserves our respect nor our compliance. A dark and checkered past is not relegated to companies like Hudson Bay, Nokia, or Unilever, who have direct traceable histories to slavery and colonization. We all know the roles that companies like Hugo Boss, Mercedes, and even the Coca-Cola company played in past atrocities. Until this day, companies like Nestle, Starbucks, Chiquita, and Tesla have not only been accused of unfair trade practices, but have also been linked to actions taken by the United States government that led to the destabilization of large portions of the global south. And by destabilization, I mean the overthrowing of governments, land seizures, genocide, terrorist insurgencies, and strong-arming governments into trade concessions that have meant economic hardship and an existential abjection for the indigenous peoples of the land. This is not a bug to the nature of corporations. It's a feature that is baked into its very essence. Because capitalism by its nature is a Ponzi scheme that exploits the global human population and funnels money through the corporations upwards along its instituted hierarchies, first within nations to the elites, and onwards from the subject nations of the south to the north. And so corporations, as the primary functional units of that system, are by their premise inherently parasitic. The minute it has grown large enough from feasting on its local population, it begins looking for new hosts, and in its insatiable quest for minimizing the cost of resources and maximizing profits, it ends up capturing its government and forces it onto a malign imperialist path. Because, make no mistake about it, there is no excess value in enterprise. The so-called excess value, which the modern enterprise labels as profit, is the stolen value and productivity of the exploited masses. What you must understand is that time is the most valuable resource on the continent. The finiteness of your time on this planet is all that matters in all of existence. And so to be adequately compensated for that resource, you should be paid not by the time you give up to a corporation in the current moment, but for the opportunity cost of that time. What endeavors, be they art, music, philosophy, or travel, that you might have undertaken. Essentially, you must be compensated for the course and trajectory of your life. The value that is generated within a corporation must be shared with some degree of equality amongst all who contributed to its existence. Because one thing you must understand is that money, especially fiat currency, is very rarely destroyed. Except you lost a cargo worth of gold to the ocean, or a bank or a house with paper currency got razed to the ground. All the value that has ever been created on this planet since we started measuring and storing that value remains on this planet. And so what has happened is that those who have accumulated an immense and immeasurable wealth over the centuries have created a system that allows them to buy their way into any enterprise, every innovation, and every spark of genius, reaping the attendant benefits from 1,000 miles away without them donating their labor and without once having to lift a finger. Only by transcending the sophistry of language, the hegemony of systems imposed on all of humanity with a brute and savage violence, can you begin to truly understand the insidious nature of exploitation on this planet. These are not natural systems of being or of human interaction. These are not enterprise or investments. This is theft, brigandage masking as natural order. Slavery, feudalism, capitalism is all a rebranding of a unique evil that has one purpose and one purpose only, and that is the corralling of the global human population into artificial nation states in order to enslave, exploit, and subjugate them. We are cattle, free-range slaves, and your cities are company towns. You may leave at the end of the day, travel across state lines and international borders, but in one form or another, you have to show up on Monday. It is only when you understand and center true autonomy, freedom, and human dignity that you begin to recognize the chains by which you are bound. Now, before I move on from the nature and role of corporations, I want to touch briefly on the financial institutions. The banks are not just complicit in this global looting of the working class by the capitalists and the ruling class, but they were set up specifically for that purpose. It is through the banks that the proceeds of exploitation are laundered and stored, and it is they who Western governments use in the erection and maintenance of the economic class and racial caste system across the West and the broader planet by using discriminatory practices to determine who gets access to capital and who does not. All the money and resources taken out of Africa are the proceeds of crime. And if the banks were not inherently set up as the financial arms of a global imperialist capitalist order, they would recognize them as such. And leaving aside that inherent evil in their constitution, banks like Wells Fargo, TD Bank, HSBC have all been fined for laundering money for drug cartels, while more broadly, almost every large Western banking corporation has received an anti-money laundering fine over the course of their existence. From Deutsche Bank, Santander, GTB, Morgan Stanley, Nordea, Danske, Royal Bank of Canada, NatWest, the list goes on. And when they are caught, the fines given them are only a fraction of the proceeds of their crime, because they are not meant to be punitive fines, but rather a symbolic slap on the wrist, a patching up of the veil, that mask of civility that has been draped across the global system of exploitation to fool us into believing that we are governed by some sort of morality-based order. And these are written off on balance sheets as the cost of doing business. These are not corporations or banks. These are criminal enterprises. And the so-called audit and management firms, beyond their insidious nature of making this system of exploitation more efficient, i.e., helping corporations streamline their operations and maximize their profits, which is just doublespeak for treating the workers who generate value for corporations and for society as line items on their balance sheets. Their more covert but equally as important purpose is simply to exploit the loopholes the lawmakers on their door have left in the laws to ensure that the capitalists and the bourgeoisie keep the wealth they have acquired from your exploitation, with very little of it going back into the society from which they have extracted it. And on the international stage, these audit and management firms, all they do is find very creative ways for the Western imperialist and vampiric corporations who undermine your government, burn down your villages, and pillage your natural resources to legally repatriate that wealth. All big four audit firms without exception, and that is Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, and Ernst & Young, have all been charged with money laundering and tax evasion, as well as most of all the smaller ones. When all the major players within an industry have been charged with a specific color of crime, it ceases to be a bug, but a feature. And like the banks, whenever the veil of their criminality is lifted, no more than a slap on the wrist, just the cost of doing business. Are you starting to see a pattern here? If every system of the modern world is steeped in criminality at the highest levels, you must understand that it isn't because humans are flawed and a few people got greedy. It is because the systems are in themselves criminal. The global world order is a criminal enterprise. They have used violence and conquest to accumulate an immeasurable wealth, and then designed a system that allows them to keep and accumulate even more. They have sold you anarchy as natural order and locked it in with enough laws and loopholes to ensure that they can continue to operate that criminality overtly when they need to. It's anarchism for nations, capitalists, and corporations, but the subterfuge of a moral order for the glut of the unwashed masses like you and I. This is why a 16-year-old boy can be tased for selling sweets at an American mall, while Chiquita is able to pay the US government to shoot indigenous people in the face, seize lands for their plantations in foreign countries, and then use the banks and audit firms to repatriate and store their imperialist plunder in the Northern Hemisphere. Let me be clear when I say this. There is no moral order on the planet. The world is anarchic, a free-for-all where countries, by any means possible, vie for domination over the other, and violence, warfare, and conquest are just extensions of the clean-nose diplomacy, the mask of civility that is imposed on the populations of the world, but especially on the citizens of the most malign and belligerent nations, for fear of sparking a revolt if they came to understand the truth about their nation's fiendish malevolence. And so nothing is off the table for the American-led Western hegemonic global order. They will coup and compromise your leaders, bribe and assassinate them, install violent dictators, foster division among your populations, deploy terrorists to slaughter your children in order to create the conditions that allow them to loot your resources. And if all fails, they will go to war and napalm your villages to ensure you do not rise or develop above the level that will challenge their global dominance. The US has been on an imperialist path since the end of World War II, while simultaneously waging a domestic war on its native black population, breaking up black families, imprisoning black men and using them as slave labor, flooding their black communities with drugs, killing them at traffic stops, couing and assassinating world leaders, while trafficking drugs across multiple international borders to fund their illicit operations. France has been exerting colonial rule and receiving colonial tax payments from at least 11 countries in Africa, as have England and Germany. And Canadian mining companies have been extracting mining concessions from these belligerents while pretending to be the most liberal and peace-loving country in the world. The list goes on. There's arguably no Western nation whose economies and corporations are not complicit and or benefit from these fascist imperialist belligerents, and their leaders are rewarded handsomely for this criminality. The cumulative stock portfolios of US lawmakers have consistently outperformed the FTSE index, and corporations are allowed to fund the lifestyles of politicians under the guise of campaign donations. And through the legalized corruption that has been rebranded as lobbying, these politicians structure domestic and foreign policy at the behest of corporations. And even more overtly, the criminal Western leaders and politicians funnel taxpayer funds to their donors, friends, and family members through such schemes like the COVID PPP scandals and track and trace schemes. And in the South, their puppet leaders, these half men who side with imperialists against their own people, are allowed to enrich themselves, their families, and their cronies to quite nauseating levels due to the carte blanche on fascistic violence that they have been given by the West to put down any domestic opposition. Cameroon's leader has been in power at the behest of France for decades without a squeak from the West. Meanwhile, Ibrahim Traoré has only been in power for 3 years, and they have already launched their laughable junta and dictatorship claims against him. And when they aren't enacting an overt violence on the southern nations, they have deemed their divine mandate to subjugate. They use their so-called international rules-based order and its institutions to advance and maintain their imperialist and vampiric hegemony. When the secret meetings at Chatham House and Washington, D.C., with the leaders of the captured and compromised nations are over, the World Bank and the IMF are sent in to execute their agendas, imposing austerity and structural adjustment programs, which amongst other things are aimed at promoting the massive privatization of national assets, lands and resources, the gutting of public services, and imposition of massive taxes on an already downtrodden populace. So-called nation-building policies that in their entire history have never successfully built up a nation. This is because rather than being true agents of nation building, their function is to act as the financial enforcers of imperialism. Thugs and henchmen in suits whose policies are backed by the threat of violence, ensuring that Western corporations are giving carte blanche to the captive nation's resources, that they are tied up in debt for insignificant loans given at exorbitant and predatory interest rates that will take entire generations to pay back, loans that they often leverage to seize assets and natural resources when a leader arises that wants to be free of their exploitation. These organizations are there to ensure that the captive nation's people are crushed into such an abjection, existing always at a subsistence level that they never get a chance, resources, or even sanity to industrialize, process their own resources, and produce the very goods that the West sells them at inflated prices using the same resources they stole from them. Because if there's one thing China has made clear before the world, it is that give any well-resourced and well-populated nation a full independence and a period of non-interference, and it will take them no more than 3 decades to surpass the West in all measures. all measures. And if you look to the world courts of justice for any sort of recourse to all of this injustice, then you are in for a big dose of disappointment. Until the war in Ukraine and Palestine, the ICC, since its inception, had never indicted anyone of European descent. Of its current 37 indictments, 28 are African, 6 are Russians, 1 is Palestinian, and 2 are Israeli. Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defense minister, who were only indicted because of the optics of the undeniable genocide they are currently executing upon the Palestinian people. And yet, if there was any real justice in the world, every prime minister and president of almost every Western nation, but particularly England, France, Germany, and America, since the end of World War II, should have been indicted, arrested, convicted, and imprisoned for causing the deaths of hundreds of millions of people in the global south and for orchestrating the most heinous crimes against humanity. And the ICJ is a farce because none of the major global players are party to it, and even those who are can basically just ignore the rulings against them. These are not courts of legal recourse. They are kangaroo courts set up to project the illusion of order, justice, and morality on the world stage. And at their core, they are institutions of white supremacy, a bully pulpit and a political battering ram designed to blackmail nations of the South and advance the propaganda that black and brown people are savages and barbarians, when in fact, it is the Western nations who have in the last 400 years at least caused hundreds of millions of deaths through their wars, their imperialism, and their colonization, much more than all the black and brown nations of the earth combined. And the NGOs and the aid organizations which are set up and funded by the West are no different, acting only as agents of white supremacy's soft power. Organizations who since their inceptions have never been able to solve any of the problems they were set up to solve. This is by design. Western nations cannot simultaneously be committing genocide, sponsoring terrorism, and carrying out regime change across the world, and then pretend to be funding aid and humanitarian organizations to solve the problems that they have themselves caused. This is a subterfuge that, if it wasn't initially apparent, has been unmasked since the role of the USAID and NED and other such organizations in funding terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram came to light in the US. The global aid and humanitarian organizations are surveillance and terrorist funding fronts for Western imperialism, operating under the pretext of humanitarianism to gather intelligence, launder Western taxpayer funds, bribe corrupt government officials, and terrorists to cause the necessary chaos in global south that allows them to pull off a regime change, or else mask the brigandage of an outright theft of minerals and natural resources. And if you want to observe the most overt manifestations of the deep state, then look no further than the American think tanks such as the Brookings Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, the NED, and the Heritage Foundation. These so-called think tanks are funded by some of the largest Western corporations, and they literally write the foreign policies of their respective nation states, passing these policy papers onto the elected officials on their door to make into law. This is how the will of corporations is made flesh. Want to see every war fought in the last 4 decades in print before they ever occurred? Search the archives of think tanks such as the Brookings Institute and the AEI. The Heritage Foundation literally wrote the Project 2025 that is being implemented to the letter by the US government. In fact, Trump even went as far as hiring some of his writers into his cabinet to supervise the implementation of these ideas. This is how overt it has become. This is the extent to which Western states have become captured by transnational interests. Education, that too is a farce, for it is in their universities that the junk science and fake intellectual theologies that have been used throughout the ages to justify racism, colonialism, and imperialism have been produced. Yes, it is in these so-called Ivy League institutions that theories like eugenics, racism, and the false theories of IQ were developed, nurtured, and bettered. Theories that the Caucasians have used to justify their loot, their plunder, the savagery, and the barbarism that they have wreaked across the planet. And even in its most benign manifestation, Western education is at its most progressive a vehicle only for the advancement of white supremacist thought and capitalist indoctrination, teaching you neither critical thinking, practical reality-based skills, or true enlightenment, but geared always towards churning out the mind-washed workers and slaves for the capitalist and imperialist machine of profit and exploitation. And their scholarship programs, their fellowships and grant-making organizations. Let me draw some parallels for you. See, in colonial times, when a community or a people were successfully conquered, it was common practice for the best and brightest minds or some influential member of the ruling class, like the king's son, to be taken to the West for an education. What this education meant really was a way to indoctrinate them into the white man's destructive and exploitative ways, thoughts, and systems, so that they can be sent back as autonomous puppets and robots, agents of indoctrination against their own people. This is exactly what programs like the Chevening Institute, Fulbright Scholarship Programs, the Ford Foundation, and other CIA intelligence programs like Young Voices for Africa, Asia, or the Middle East are designed to do. They invite the best brains to the West, indoctrinate them, send them back to their regions with money to fund so-called human rights organizations that weaponize legitimate social issues such as LGBT movement and women's rights against their own governments, oftentimes acting as internal and often unwitting intelligence operatives within their own countries. Do you understand what it is I'm trying to achieve? I'm trying to paint a picture that allows you to understand the depth of corruption that is present in a global order, a malignancy that permeates its DNA and reaches deep into its foundation. There is no institution or system that has been set up by the West that does not have at its very core the advancement of white supremacy and white-dominated rule. There are no benign systems that exist anywhere in the world. They are all malign. Democracy is a scam. All their nations were built during their monarchy and dictatorial eras because they know that robust nation building cannot be executed in 4-year cycles. It was designed to be undermined and disruptible, giving them a 4-year period to change any leaders that they don't like. Healthcare is for profit, which is why they have stopped curing diseases and why it has been deployed as a weapon many times across black populations across the world. Your 3 meals a day is probably killing you. And insurance companies fight tooth and nail to not have to fulfill the very function for which they were set up. And their religion. I don't think I have to tell you as a black person that the Abrahamic religions are tools of control, mind traps that will have you seeking redemption where you have not erred, sustenance when abundance is already yours, that will have you gazing up to the heavens so you may not confront the exploitation taking place on your lands and beneath your feet. It teaches you subservience, normalizes your subjugation, and distracts you from your true power as a catalyst for change and rebellion against a corrupt and unjust system. The Catholic Church sanctioned your enslavement and has since used its doctrines to not only keep you in that enslavement, but also to steal what little morsels you are able to scrounge from the scorched earth of their imperialism. Historically, until date, they are responsible not only for the evils of slavery and colonization, but also for the mass rape, torture, and murder of women and children ever since. They have stolen and corrupted your divinity and created the gods of your terror. What was once internal, they have made into the vulgar externalities of the idolatrous Abrahamic gods. It's 2025. It's time to wake up. And to conclude this thesis, let's do a quick skim through the arts and entertainment. The only thing you need to take away is that you do not know yet the true talent that exists on this planet. And what true genius we do know, we are denied its full expression. All of art is compromised. All the institutions of the arts, the movies, the music, literature, and the visual arts are all owned and regulated by the imperialist powers, and all are expressed through the 4 stencils of oppression: religion, capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy, via which we manifest all of our material reality. The art that makes it to your TV screens, your music playlists, and your bookshelves have been allowed to do so, has been curated to either be benign to or to be an active champion of these systems, but rarely to challenge them. All mainstream literature that is consumed in the West come out of one of 4 big publishing houses. The same with the movies, and the same with the music. Why do you think that almost all of the African literature that is consumed in the West is essentially poverty porn? Stories of poverty and wars, of mud huts, bicycles, and untold suffering on the continent, or of the real issues like LGBT rights and feminism that have been weaponized to advance imperialist goals. The music is compromised. It's now an empty, vacuous materialism that is a husk of what real music can be. Black American music that has for a long time carried most of the global culture has been co-opted, from its conscious roots to the orgy of violence, materialism, and sexual debauchery that it now promotes. The movies are imperialist and white supremacist propaganda, and physical art has become just another money laundering scheme for rich people. So even while talent might assert itself within these poisoned institutions, its essence, art as struggle, as resistance, has been captured and compromised. In a world that is founded upon and maintained by violence, all art is political. And if art is not confronting this violence, then it is complicit, serving as opiate, as distraction from the only issue that demands confrontation on this praising planet. And the news is Western imperialist propaganda. I don't think I need to say more than that. Watch it to understand the enemy's next moves, but know at the back of your mind that the Western mainstream news channels are imperialist, white supremacist propaganda. Now, if art and education is compromised, drawing only from this poison trough of thought and creativity, then so also are the laureate and award systems that honor these achievements. The Grammys, the BAFTAs, the Emmys, the Booker, the Nobel Prize, the Pulitzer Prizes, they all are political and agenda-driven systems designed to honor not the most talented or the most brilliant, but the artist, message, or invention that advances, or at the very least, does not challenge the ultimate aims of the global system. Chinua Achebe and Ngugi wa Thiong'o, despite being the two greatest writers to have come out of the continent, were never recognized at the highest levels. And whether it is explicitly declared or not, we all know it was largely as a result of their uncompromising anti-imperialist stance. And yet, Wole Soyinka, whose early literary enterprise was funded by the CIA, was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. If there's one thing I want to ask you as Black people, as Africans, is to stop looking for validation in these prizes and awards. They are made up. They are not divine mandates, and they are as credible or even less so than any that you might yourselves come up with. Their entire legacy is upheld only by the subterfuge of their true political and economic aims, and have never in all of their existence functioned as a true indicator of worth or of talent. To fight an enemy, you must first be able to recognize and understand it. And this is why I've taken the time to highlight how all these systems that make up this so-called global order are not merely compromised, but are rather designed as institutions of white supremacy and Western hegemony. And so to organize resistance against these forces, it is important to recognize that imperialism and exploitation is not just the bombs and the guns or the many antics of the CIA and other foreign intelligence agencies. It is everything. It is the very systems that we consider normal, that we consider an organic manifestation from our mere existence and the reality of our interaction as a species. You were not born into a natural order, but long after that order had been captured and dismantled and a web woven in its stead around you. You are a slave, Neo. You were born into a matrix, a prison, and you have been socialized into its dysfunction. The world is a criminal enterprise, and all of its institutions are a manifestation of a criminal exploitation and a malicious subjugation of self, of lands, of resources, and of people. A Tesla factory is a manifestation of imperialism in the Congo. Chiquita is a manifestation of imperialism in South America. The presence of Starbucks, Amazon, and Uber anywhere other than the US are a manifestation of the US's imperialism across the world. And the mere existence of corporations are a manifestation of an exploitation and subjugation of the individual and of the self. And so when I lay these things out, this is not to cause you despair, but to awaken a rage inside of you. It is for you to rise above a material rebellion, but to consider your rebellion at an existential level. And so when I say to you as a Black person, an indigenous person, a member of the Global South, or indeed any human with an extant soul, that it is your moral duty to undermine these systems, I'm not asking you to commit a crime. I'm urging you to achieve the moral clarity that allows you to recognize the criminality and the illegitimacy of the global world order, an order that cheats you and robs you, that drains you of your essence and deprives you of your most precious resource, which is time. A system that napalms your villages, murders your fathers, rapes your women, and enslaves your children, that loots and pillages its way across the continent and keeps you in abject destitution while it plunders the wealth beneath your feet, that steals your knowledge and profits off of your genius, even as it uses its monopoly on global information systems to mentally and physically enslave you and your children, that undermines your development, destroys your civilizations, calls you savage, a system that spits in your face by daring to say that the instrument it uses to carry out its atrocities are moral order and are designed to save and civilize you. I'm asking you to recognize that this modern epoch, this criminality that was created and is maintained by a grim and savage violence, these corporations, these systems are all active combatants in the battle for our freedom, for our souls, and for our liberation. For the world is not in dysfunction. It is manifesting exactly as it was designed. It just wasn't designed in your best interest. You are existing in someone else's fiction. You are cattle, and nation states are your corralling paddock. You are here to toil in the fields and the sewers, while the elites and the oligarchs lounge away in their ivory towers. You are a resource to be put to work at their factories and for fiat extraction. You didn't come to this realm as it is to find an abundant and meaningful life. You are here to be a slave. And while hoodwinking the rest of us into believing that we are all here working for the common good of humanity, the elites understand that the world is anarchic and have used that understanding to loot all of the world, design the systems that not only allow them to keep that loot, but to continue their looting unabated and unchallenged. And because they use violence to maintain these systems, to confront them, to challenge them in their most covert and deviant form, we must learn to wield the violence that they deploy against us, against their corporations, their institutions, and their systems. For these are nothing but malign actors, the belligerent soldiers of Western imperialism, and therefore fair game in the struggle for the liberation of all of humanity, but especially of Africa and the global South. There are many ways to run resistance, to destroy an empire, many ways to whittle its foundations, and indeed many ways to claw back some of the wealth that has been stolen from you. Some are overt and violent, others are covert and subtle. The nuclear resistance of North Korea, China, Iran, and Russia have acquired nukes as a form of aggressive defense of their sovereignty. China has built an empire-destroying economy, while North Korea had an army of the most elite and skillful hackers who routinely target American and Western corporations. In a moral world, the type that they want you to think exists, this might be considered state-sanctioned theft, but it is no theft at all. If we, as we approach the end of this video, we do not consider the actions of the North Korea's financial hacking team as one of the most effective forms of covert anti-imperialism, then I have failed in my duty. And as a Nigerian, the only gripe I have with so-called Yahoo boys is the targeting of individuals. Because if you think it is morally wrong or that you should lose sleep because some Nigerian kid hit JP Morgan, Facebook, or Microsoft, then you have not yet achieved the moral clarity you're going to need to be useful in this fight for freedom and liberation. Jesus came into the temple and attacked the money. He attacked the money. And so in case I haven't been explicit enough, let me state it again. The global world order is one of an institutionalized criminality, a complete and thorough worldwide finesse, and it is your moral duty as an upright person, as a person who aches for justice and equity and freedom for your people, to undermine these systems in whatever creative means possible, whether it's taking a banana off the shelf of a multinational grocery store, or channeling your inner North Korean hacker or a Nigerian boy with laser-guided precision against our collective enemy. And that enemy to all indigenous and free people of this earth is the racist and fascist Western imperialist world order, its corporations, its institutions, and its pretend systems of moral order.